All right, thanks everybody. Sorry for the late start. Thought I'd start with a wee story. Forgot to mention this before. So there was a roast of Christopher Lawless at a pork fest recently, and I was told, unfortunately, that it was cancelled by the organizer, who had some trouble with the management. And so I show up, just expecting an evening of chatting and so on, and then I find out, hey, the roast is back on, and you're going up for 10 to 15 minutes to try and make jokes about a guy you don't really know that well in front of a sadly sober crowd. It was a dry pork fest. I say sadly sober only from the point of view of trying to make people laugh, not from the fact that it's sad to be sober. So isn't this every sort of person's nightmare? Go up and be funny in front of a crowd of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with no preparation and very little warning time. And so I was running around asking people, hey, do you know Christopher Lawless? Do you know Christopher Lawless? And nobody did. And so my first joke was going to be that he really is just a collective figment of our imagination, but he's too big for that. So I went up and I literally had nothing. Yeah, and I watched a couple of other people. And this is the closest I've really come to being religious, is to pray to the gods of comedy to favor me with a kind joke or two. And anyway, I got a little bit of an inspiration. And there it was. I was able to come up with a few good jokes, but that was interesting. That's a sort of real test of confidence, like, oh, Miko system, please come up with something funny. No pressure. I'm sorry that we're not better prepared, but it was quite funny to come up with stuff more on the spot, which was really exciting. I haven't had any dreams about it before or since, so I'm sure it wasn't too stressful, but that was an interesting moment in public speaking. I just wanted to mention that. Anyway, let's move on with the listenership. Again, I'm sorry for the late start, but I'm all ears if we have a caller or question, or if you have questions in the chat. Please do. Oh, yes. In an Indian accent. Hello, Steph. Please try first unplugging a router for 1 minute, then plugging it back in. Yes, that's what we should be doing. Exactly. I'm sorry that you can't find the any key.
Have you tried putting in your password?
What is it? Back in the day. Oh, this is way back in the day. The stories were going the rounds of help desks that somebody kept complaining that their 5.25-inch boot floppy disk just kept not working, and turned out that they kept it pinned to the metal cabinet by the computer with a large magnet, and they just had a problem that it just didn't it didn't work. These things can happen, my friends. It's like when the coffee holder breaks. All right. So do we have any callers at the moment, or is it time for Randall Chatty Fest?
No, we do have some people on the line. If you would like to start, come on up. ST.
What, me? Oh, I have to ask some questions now?
You don't have to, my friend. It's really, really up to you.
Okay. Well, I guess I wanted to ask you because I heard some stuff that you have said on feminism and democracy. And I was wondering what your view is on the fact that the feminist movement got females the vote. And that together with the acknowledgement that democracy is pretty much the system that restricts the power of government the least, because people will always vote for the government to do more things, but voting will never work to restrict the government. So if you have more people voting, doesn't that mean that the government will do more? And isn't that a bad thing? What are your views on that?
Yeah, I certainly agree. There's a Hoppian argument that says that in many ways aristocracy is better than democracy, because with aristocracy you're planning to hand the kingdom to your children, so you're going to have more of an interest in its long-term, the maintenance of its long-term value, as opposed to if you are, a 1 or 2 term president or whatever, you don't really care about the long-term health of the system. And of course it is to your interest to pay as many people off as possible in order to maintain your power. I think, one of the challenges that I think is really significant around state money in intellectual endeavors is that the purpose of a movement, the purpose of an intellectual movement, is to make itself obsolete in many ways, right? So, the purpose of abolitionism, the purpose of getting rid of slavery, was to disband itself. right? The purpose of trying to gain equal rights for minorities and for women, the purpose of that is to end itself, right? And I think that's really, really important. The problem with state money, I mean, one of the many problems with state money for intellectual exercises or intellectual movements, like anti-racism, like feminism and so on, is that there's no terminus. There's no endpoint, right? It doesn't commit its own beneficial harikari because it has achieved its goals. So when you have state money, you set up a continual flow of resources towards particular intellectual groups. And those intellectual groups may very well have incredibly just and righteous things to achieve, like equality for women and minorities. The problem is when those things have to a large degree been achieved, and it was in the early 60s that it became illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender for employment or for education or other things. Well, when you have achieved those things, but the money is still flowing, what happens? Well, the movement doesn't end once it's achieved its goals. It then starts to go further and starts to look for things like positive discrimination, right? Affirmative action for women and affirmative action for blacks or other minorities. This is hugely problematic, of course, right? Because it's collective innocence and collective guilt. Saying that we should have affirmative action for women because in the past they were denied opportunities is exactly the same as arguing that women should have 2 votes now because women in 1910 didn't have any vote. But this is ascribing morality to a concept called women or blacks or whatever, and it's not good. It's not good. So my concern, you can see this tipping point. There's a lot that is right and just and fair about the drive for equality under the law. And where inequality under the law exists, it is something that needs to be opposed, which is why I'm very much for want of a better phrase, equality under the law for children, right? You can't hit your boss, you can't hit your employees, you can't hit your wife, you can't hit your husband or your aunt or your uncle or your politician. You can only hit your children, right? So we're just looking for equality under the law for the most helpless and dependent in society. And that's great. That's wonderful. But if there is no private source of funding for intellectual movements, they tend to go too far and become corrupted because there is no natural terminus, right? So once women have achieved legal equality, then we would expect the funding for the groups driving for legal equality to go down, of course, right? In the same way you and I don't donate a lot to anti-slavery movements anymore. And that is essential because what it does is it releases the passionate, the moral, and the intellectual, and the great communicators. It releases them to do other great good in society and to look for other great deeds and other great wrongs to right and so on. But because the government money keeps flowing into a sphere where equality has already been achieved, it then starts to demand more. It has to invent new problems and create new issues and so on. And this is how things get corrupted. And I would love for the funding for Free Domain Radio to dry up tomorrow. I think that would be fantastic because that would mean that I could go back to being a novelist and a poet and a business person and work in those fields because the world had become sane and rational and philosophical. But I certainly do look forward to the day where a philosophy show does not need to be funded or doesn't need to be supported in a way. But that's not about to happen. So I hope that helps. Does that answer any of your questions?
Yeah, and that was mainly where I was coming from. I don't think that there'll ever come a day where you don't need like intellectual discussions going on to remind people of what sort of things they should be supporting and stuff. But I wanted to say that a very important thing is that equality under the law is very different from like general equality. Because if you strive for general equality, then you have to sacrifice equality under the law to get it, and then you get none of the law. And like, for example, like gender discrimination for hiring. I think I've heard you talk about this, but if you haven't, then I don't know. But like when an employer discriminates and he doesn't want to hire, like say, women, for example, it's because he doesn't think that women will be as productive in that sort of job. So if you make it illegal for him to discriminate, then that's going to create a lot of troubles because then maybe he won't pay his male employees as much, or maybe he just wants interview a woman because he knows that if he hires one and then fires her, then he's gonna get a lawsuit or something. So a lot of these policies end up achieving, all of these policies end up achieving the exact opposite of their intended goals. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Yeah, like my question was mainly coming from the Hoppian perspective. I read Democracy, They Got That Fair, a book that Hoppy wrote that is very interesting. And in there he argues that because democracy is a force of civilization, the more people who vote, the worse it is. And so while it was bad that males were voting and females were not, like the solution wasn't to get females to vote, but to promote the votes from males and eventually promote the state, right? But that's not what happened.
Yeah, and so we move from the correction of historical injustices through the extension of, I would argue, UPB or common law, to then the concept of restitution, which, I think comes dangerously close to bribery, right? So this is sort of what happened to some aspects of mainstream feminism with some great success, which was that they began to argue for pay equity laws. And so they no longer wanted the market to set the rates for male or female or individual employment, but they wanted to set up laws and rules to ensure this and basically to get pay raises for women by saying, well, this job is kind of equivalent to this job, which is, fundamentally, it's central planning, it's communism, it's obviously violent. And there is, there are challenges to hiring. I mean, if we have a traditional family structure, which a lot of people are still aiming towards, there are challenges with hiring women. And anyone who who doesn't understand that is missing some basic biology. Most women want to have kids, and most women will take some interruptions in time to have their kids. And after they have their kids, they will have restrictions on the amount that they can work, because we've got this ridiculous system, which is if feminists, I think, and I consider myself a feminist, and I love to advance the economic equality and opportunities for women, and I especially, I mean, it's always been the case, but in particular now that I'm a dad, I really oppose gender stereotypes and so on, and really think that it's a lot of a nonsense that gets piled on kids about cute and pink and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, one of the things that feminists could really fight for if they really wanted to help women in the workplace, the most important thing that they could do is fight to get the school day to match the work day. I mean, isn't it completely ridiculous that you have a school day that back when I was going to school, it was 9 o'clock until 3:15. I think it may be a little bit earlier now, whatever. But, I mean, can you imagine trying to set up a private school when people work 9 to 5, saying, oh, yeah, no, we turf your kids out on the street 2 hours before you can come and get them. I mean, that school would be out of business in about 8 seconds. In fact, it would never even get any funding because it would just be such a ridiculous business model. It'd be like, it's a car rental place. You rent your car from Los Angeles and you have to return it by a hard-to-find cactus somewhere in the Nevada desert. That would just be bad comedy. And so if women really wanted to, if feminists or women, people interested in women's rights, if they really wanted to help women, then they would find a way to get the school day extended. But of course, nobody wants to try any of that sort of stuff, because the moment that you try that kind of stuff, you really do run into the aggression and the violence and the entitlement of the status system. And people don't want to get close to that because it's pretty humiliating to see the gun in the room. So,
Right. I totally agree with that. And while we are on the subject of schooling, I guess I wanted to ask, what do you think about like compulsory schooling? I'm guessing you're not for that, but like I think that beyond the fact that kids can be legally assaulted by their families in most countries, there's also the fact that they are forced to attend these indoctrination camps set up by the state. And whether they're public or private doesn't really make that much of a difference, because the private ones get their, like they have to teach the stuff that the state says. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the teachers have to be the same. The teachers are almost always part of the union, and they have to teach the same crap curriculum. Well, I mean, when you put compulsion into a voluntary relationship, it's no longer voluntary. right? So we put compulsion into borrowing, and it becomes theft, right? We put compulsion into labor, and it becomes slavery. We put compulsion into sex, and it becomes rape. So it is a kind of slave mind rape theft of childhood to force children into schools. And nobody's interested in the education of the children. I mean, they're interested in the indoctrination of the children, of course. The state is very interested in that. But what the children are is crops, right? They are livestock, they are crops, they are resources to be held hostage in return for money. That's really all it comes down to. And we see that, of course, in public schools. We see that with national debts. We always see that in wartime, of course. Children are resources to be domesticated, to be shaped, to be molded, to fit into the existing society. And any children who don't are ostracized, attacked, mocked, drugged, expelled, humiliated to the point where they have to fit into society. In any relationship between strong powers, there always has to be a lubricant. There always has to be something that's going to give way. And usually it's the youngest kid in a family or whatever. It may not be the youngest kid, but if there's a lot of fighting in families, a lot of conflict between, say, the mom and an elder sibling, then usually the younger sibling is the one who gives up their needs and just becomes the peacemaker and the social lubricant, so to speak. And in our society, if children were respected as full human beings, then our society could not function even close to the way that it is currently pretending to function. And that is, I mean, if you look at when women in sort of the 16th century or the 15th century were, cattle breeding sows, that's how they were treated. They had very few legal rights. They were there basically to make children and to make dinner and to keep house. And if you look at how society has changed, once we have recognized that women are full human beings, society has changed immeasurably. And if we can conceive of or begin to think about the argument that children are the fullest of full human beings in society, they are the ones who have the first rights, the most necessary rights, the deepest rights. They need the most consistent rights. They need the greatest protection. They must be afforded the greatest opportunities for choice. Right now, we've got it completely backwards. Right now, children have the least choice and adults have the most choice. It should be the complete opposite. We should be encouraging as much choice as humanly possible and extend as many rights of morality and protection and respect to children first and foremost. But right now, the exact opposite is true. Children's needs are not even consulted in society. I mean, they're not even viewed as entities whose needs could even remotely be consulted. I mean, how many times did you ever go to school and get a form about how, what you would like or how well things would go? The amount of aggression that goes on in the home compared to that which goes on outside the home is completely disproportionate. Children are not allowed to vote, but they are sold off to bribe existing voters and are responsible for the principal plus interest that accrues when they grow up. Children did not have anything to do with the existing systems that have killed their economic opportunities and put them $1 trillion in student debt and robbed them of job opportunities and advancement and growth and have them stuck living at home until they're in their 20s and so on. So the idea that we would look at our society and say, aha, we have children. Now, whatever moral rules we have, whatever good we think we can or should achieve as a society, let's focus it on children first. Forget everyone else. To hell with everyone else right now. If there's a right called freedom from violence, okay, children first. If there's a right to freedom of association, children first as much as it can be achieved. If there is a right to self-determination, children first. If there is a right to equality, children first. If there is a right to freedom from beatings or verbal abuse, children first. And we don't do that at all. All of the corruption that goes on in society can only survive because we refuse to extend basic humanity to children. That it can even be a debate about whether children can be hit or not is beyond shocking at a very fundamental human level. The fact that there are so many vociferous defenders of hitting children is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. And the future will look back upon us as lower than troglodyte, orc-based Lord of the Flies barbarians for even having such a debate, especially with so many people on the pro-hitting side. But just imagine what it would be if any kind of ethic we thought of, any kind of virtue we thought of, any kind of human dignity and respect that we thought of how to maximize it for children, first and foremost. What if we designed a society? What if we designed a society by saying to kids, hey, what do you guys want? What would make you happy? What would make you happy? But that doesn't mean, of course, we're adults, right? When children, they're still learning a lot about consequences and so on. So I'm not saying that they then become the new dictators. But what if freedom from violence, which we all understand, husband hits his wife, just slaps her, bam! She calls the cops. He goes to jail. One time. Even though she's an adult, she chose the relationship and she can leave at any time. Parent hits child. Well, that's good. That's discipline. That's good parenting. That's making sure they're not spoiled. Most people aren't even that ambivalent about this. So this is really all my show ever comes down to. UPB is about kids. The gun in the room is about kids. It's the hand on the ass. Right? We can't see the gun in the room in the state because we can't see the aggression in the room in the family. We have enormous trouble extending UPB, which is a very obvious concept, extending UPB because people are very guilty about UPB violations with their kids, whether those UPB violations are hitting them or circumcising them or yelling at them or abandoning them by throwing them in daycare all week. This is why people get so reactionary about UPB, because if UPB is true, the first place we need to think about it, the first place we need to apply it, and I would argue really the only place we need to apply it, because it all flows from there, is to children. But when you have 80 to 90% of parents still hitting their children, well, UPB is going to be a pretty tough nut to swallow, because the conscience is UPB fueled. And UPB reaches into the mind through the heart, up the ventricles, through the spine, and grabs the conscience and drags it from the muck and throws it spinning with fire into the sky. And people do not like the soaring-eyed glare of their UPB-based conscience. So UPB is a very emotionally difficult thing for people to process.
Yeah,
the people I know who process it best are the people who have either never used or have abandoned the use of aggression in their own lives. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, I was saying that I couldn't agree with all of that more. And that I definitely agree that in order to have what we would call a completely healthy society, we need to have respect for children and like parents treating them in the same way that they would treat their friends or their spouses or whatever. And that's not the way it is, and it's not the way it's ever been done, really. But I think something interesting to consider is that right now, a lot of the freedoms that are taken away from children are not taken away by the family, and a lot of those are, but a lot of those are taken away